Just as a quick review, this is what we've done so far in period 3. I've shown you how to take shapes using the double pen held at a 45-degree angle to write these shapes that will be formed into letters. This morning I'm going to go through the entire alphabet. So far we've done all of the O shapes. The B is kind of an O shape. The D is an O shape. The P is an O shape. The lowercase g is an O shape. The number 9, the number 6, all of these are O shapes. Then this basic shape for the I and the A and the M and the N are all based on this shape here. There's a few variations of other shapes, such as the V. Notice the 2 different Y's. I'm going to go through the entire alphabet, and I'm going to allow my substitute to pause the video if need be, but I'm going to go and do multiple letters for each, or multiple samples for each letter so that you can see how they're formed. We've already got the basis, so now we're just going to learn the entire lowercase alphabet and then just practice that for the rest of the day. So remember, for this particular style of letter that we're learning, we're going to do a 45-degree angle. I'm zoomed in so that you can see the details. That's a 45-degree angle, half of 90. Anytime you get stuck and your letters start looking wrong, go ahead and put your pen here and then place it back down wherever you're beginning to write. Also, please remember that you're using your entire arm, not just your fingers and not just your wrist. Your hand can be set on the table if you need to, but you're still using your entire arm. And you can't see that in motion, but I've demonstrated it in class all year long, so that should not now be a problem. So, where we left off was the letter I, but it's also the first part of the letter A. And again, this is zoomed way in. I'm going to show you where to start and stop. My pen's at a 45-degree angle. I'm going to go up a little ways, curve it around, and then right before I get to the bottom of this next line, I'm going to curve it like this and stop. You'll hear me say this a lot. You're going to cap off every line. If this were an actual calligraphy pen, you wouldn't need to do that because it would fill in the paint or the ink to that spot. So then I'm going to come a little bit more than halfway up, and if you do this correctly, the top line should cover the bottom line as you do this letter. So that's the 45. They've almost become one line. And then I'm just going to curve it back around until it touches here, the second line. So pay close attention as you're doing this to where the lines touch. Try to avoid, when you're doing this letter, going really radically like this. That's not the correct letter form. It's more of a slight angle, but it's mostly up and down, mostly vertical. Just do a slight curve at the end, cap it off there and there, come back here, and then curve it back up like that. Practice an entire line of these, or leave space to practice an entire line of these, because as I've been saying all along, just like playing a musical instrument, calligraphy entails repetition. The next letter we're going to do is the B. The B is actually 2 lines tall. So for just the next couple of minutes, let me give you some definitions, and I'd like you to write these down. The lowercase a is the same height as the letter X, so it's called the X height. When you use calligraphy pens, you measure the X height based on the width of your pen. And I'm doing these a little bit smaller to fit in this line just for practice, but when we get to our final, let me show you how tall this letter ought to be. If I lay my pens down like this, I'll do it actually here. Instead of this being a 45, I'm now at a 90. And I'm just going to draw a straight line like this and cap it off. And then just like a stair step, I'm going to draw this one and cap it off, this one and cap it off, and this one and cap it off. These instructions are actually on the bottom of the handout. The nib is what the pen tip is called, so that's another definition. And the height, the cap height, or excuse me, not the cap height, the X height of the lowercase letter is 4 nibs tall. You'll also notice that the pen angle here is 30 degrees, except for X, Y, and Z. To simplify things, I've made them all 45 degrees, and for our purposes, because it's kind of close, the letter's still sort of squashed here, but in actuality this A should be that tall because this is the X height of this particular alphabet. So what this should look like is this. Again, we're not going to concern ourselves with that right now. We're just practicing the letter forms. One other thing you'll notice, it's really kind of hard to see on some of these copies, but you'll notice there's little numbers inside these alphabets, these letters. It shows the 1 and the 2. It's kind of faded from this particular one. I'll try and get better copies next time, but for instance the C, you start here and do this stroke, and then you do that one. The one thing missing from this is that there should also be a start and a stop point, which is normally represented by arrows. So for instance, this one, represented by an arrow there, would be labeled 1. 2 would actually be labeled straight down there. Now I didn't stop here, I continued on to 3, but technically you should do this first, then do that, and then do this for the letter A. I'm simplifying it somewhat for our purposes based on how much time we have left, making the letters a little bit smaller, but for future projects, if you continue doing calligraphy, you need to know that the nib width is what determines the X height. So capital letters are actually 2 X heights. So if I kept going, I'm actually going to go this way this time. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is actually the cap height. 8 widths. So that's what size a capital letter should be. Again, for simplicity's sake, we're going to use these double lines on this paper that we've got. A more advanced class would require me to teach you to draw your own lines and measure it out like this. Because there's 2 more things that are involved. Let me label this cap height. Please label it like that on your paper also, so that I know that you watched this part of the video and you took the notes. So that this is the X height, this one is the cap height. Then there's 2 other things involved. If you look at your notes from the other day, anything that goes below the X height is called a descender. Anything that goes above the cap height, like this H might actually go a little higher, that's called the ascender. These are definitions that you'll need to know, and I'll be quizzing you on them later. So one more time. Generally speaking, the descender does not go too far below the cap height. Sometimes it'll go 2 or 3 widths of the nib, and that's as far down as, for instance, a Y will go. So if this is the cap height, this is the descender. The descender goes down to usually not more than about 3 nib widths below the cap height. Generally speaking, this A would be down here. I did it a little bit in reverse, excuse me. So the A would normally be down here. This line right here is called the baseline. And again, that's how you would measure. If we were measuring this all out to get it exactly proportionately, that's the way that would be done. The ascender generally does not go too far above the cap height. Sometimes people like to extend them, but for instance for the letter H, and I'll use a different color so that you can see. The letter H would start up here this again is my X height, and that's how the letter H would be formed. Okay, so now we're going to go through the entire alphabet, letter by letter, and you should have most of what I get finished today, you should have done by the end of the class period. So, starting with an almost brand new sheet of paper, I've just folded mine to fit in front of me better. You're welcome to fold it this way as well if you need more space. Please make sure that your name is somewhere on your page written with just one of the pens. So, name and period number. Put that on every paper. All I did was I tilted the pen a little bit and I was able to write with just one of the pens. Also remember, if you're left-handed, I've changed the tape on these so that the left-handed pen has blue tape around it. And remember, the difference is, notice how on the left-handed pen they're not even. And that basically has to do with the fact that for a left-hander you have to hold the pen slightly differently. So, because I'm right-handed, I'm going to show you how to do this letter by letter. And I'm going to show you where to start and stop. As soon as my camera focuses. Okay, the letter A. We're going to use 1 X height for the A. We're going to start just below the top of the X height. Come down, and right before you get to the bottom of the X height, stop right there. It's curved, but you're going to stop right there and cap it off like this. Then I'm going to start a little bit higher than halfway, go at a 45-degree angle to the left and down so that the line covers up the other line, and I'm going to stop there for now because that's the way the sheet shows it as being the second stroke. Then I'm going to do a little U shape to bring it back up here, and notice when I do this, I stop right where this touches here. So that's the beauty of doing the double pen lesson method, because you can see where you're supposed to start and stop based on the width of the nib. Notice I didn't quite get it right here. A little bit of separation there because my pen was angled slightly different. One of the things I'm hearing a lot lately is that your pens are running out of ink. More than likely they're not running out of ink. What's happening is you're lifting up one pen or the other and it's not touching the paper. So you have to be careful about that. The letter B, I'm going to start way up here. I'm going to do a slight curve and then bring it straight down, and right before I hit the bottom of the X height, I'm going to curve it like that until it touches here. Then I'm going to come back around again until it connects here. Excuse me. Then I'm going to cap this off, and I'm also going to cap this off right here. This would normally be filled in by the calligraphy pen with the ink, but for our purposes we're just going to keep capping it off so that it looks right. So one more B. Again, slight curve right before I eyeball where the baseline is. I'm going to curve it around like this and up until this line touches that line. Then I'm going to start about here and do the same thing, and I'm aiming for where these lines connect. So that's AB. Here's the C. Start just below the X height. Come around until it touches. Then put your pens back up here and come around this way. And you can sort of see where it lines up here. So I'm going to end it right over here. Technically I should have ended it right about there. So I'm actually going to cap it off right above where it would meet here. And again, this is something that you'll learn with practice. And calligraphy is a lot of practice, a lot of repetition, just like learning how to play a musical instrument. You get better at it as you do it. So go ahead and finish off a couple of C's. The next letter we're going to do is the letter D. Again, for our purposes, we're going to call this the cap height, and that's where our A sender is going to go. So I'm going to start here and come all the way down to the baseline here. The letter D actually starts off with what looks like a C. So start off with the C. In order for me to get this letter correct, I have to aim for right here. So even though my pen is up here at the top of the cap height, as soon as I start curving around, I'm looking at this part of this letter so that I can hit it so that the letter looks like it's connected here. I'll show you again. Start with the letter C. I tried to end right where these two look like they were one on top of the other. Just a slight curve here at the top, and then I'm going to come straight down and aim for those. I missed it that time too, so I'm going to do it again. Remember not to exaggerate this last swooping line here. One more C. I'm going to go right up here, slight to the left, straight down, and that time I hit it right on. The letter E is just like the letter C, but after you do this line here, you're going to keep going straight down. So here's the E, or the C part of the E. It sounds like a song. And I'm just going to go down at a 45-degree angle and finish off the E. This is how we practiced the other day when we first started learning this alphabet. So that one should not be new to you. The F is kind of difficult because it's got a lot of different shapes attached to it, and there's a couple of really tricky things that happen here. And again, you can't see the number, but we're going to start just below the line here. We're going to come straight down, and right before we get to the baseline, we're going to curve slightly to the left. Notice how it pinches right here. Now they do it as separate lines, but I'm going to do it in one fluid motion where I'm going to come down and go right into the second stroke. And again, there is a little bit of curve here, but for the most part, for our practice purposes, we're going to do a straight line, and I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm a little bit below the cap height. I'm going to come straight down, and right before it gets to the baseline, I'm going to go to the left. so that it almost pinches right here. Then I'm going to come straight across just a little ways and cap that off. Then I'm going to put my pens back up here on the top, and I'm going to slightly curve it up until it hits there, which is the top of the cap height, and then I'm going to come straight across again. This width is about twice what this width is. I'm going to cap this off, cap this off, and then I'm going to put this pen on the X height right there and just draw straight across until this pen hits this second line over here, like this. Notice how I stopped right there. I didn't go through. Then when I cap this off, that's what gives the F, the lowercase f, that shape. I'll do another one. Again, I'm starting just below the cap height. I'm coming straight down. Right before I get to the baseline, I'm going to the left, and this time I'm just going to go straight across in one motion. Cap that off, come back up here, curve it until I get to the cap height, and then go straight across, not too far. Cap that one off, cap the back half of the letter, put my pen down right at the center line here, come straight across until it touches the second line there, and then cap those two off. I'll do one more because there's space over here for one more. Starting just below the cap height line, coming down slightly to the left, go to the right, cap it off, come back up here and curve it until it hits the top of the cap height, straight across, twice the distance here, twice the width, cap that one off, start here on the crossbar till it hits this second line and cap that one off. Now we've already done the G a couple of times in practice the other day. Remember that the G again starts off looking like an O or a C. I'm going to start just a little bit below the cap height line here. I'm going to do my first part of my G like this. I'm going to finish it off to look like an O. Then right where I finished off here, I'm going to put my pens right here, and here's where you have that serpentine or S look. Looks like the letter S. And my pen's got a little bit off here because these lines should be overlapping. So I'm going to correct my pen. Starting right below this elbow here, I'm going to go to the left until it gets to about the width here, and then come around until it connects here. And then the last line that we're going to do is the little tail on the top. Kind of curves up here, and then you cap it off like that. I'll do that one a couple of times because that's a really complex letter. One more time I'm also going to squash it a bit this time. Start off with the letter C, turn it into an O. I'm going to go right from here into the sweeping serpentine. You'll also notice that my letters are a little bit different than the letters in here. Notice how wide the bottom is down here on the descender. If I wanted my alphabet to look exactly like that one, I have to really concentrate because this isn't the type of alphabet that I'm usually doing in calligraphy. So I'll try this one more time, try and look at it and get it exactly right. I'm going to go a little bit more shallow on that part. Again, I'm going to sweep this down till it's about halfway top to bottom. Go to the left, and this time I'm going to go really wide before I come back this way. The more complex letters are some of my favorite letters of every alphabet, and every one of them has them. So that's the G. The next one's the H. We're going to start here just below this letter E here, below this cap height line. I'm going slightly to the left, and then I'm coming straight down, and right before I hit the end, I'm curving. We've done this stroke several times, so you should have this one down pretty well. I'm only going to do a couple of these. Starting right about here, come up, slight curve at the bottom. Notice again that I covered up that line. You'll know that you have the 45-degree angle correct whenever you do one of these lines and it covers up the original line. The letter I, it just looks like this piece right here. So I'm going to start right below the X height. I'm going to go a little bit higher, come down, and it does alter a little bit because it's a little more curved at the bottom here. Just make sure to stop right here so that you can cap that off. The other thing that you'll notice on the handout is that there's just two parallel lines here. What they didn't do was they didn't cap them off. So basically, the width of the I here, I'm going to start right here, do two parallel lines, and then cap it off like that. Remember, here's another definition. This is called a tittle. T-I-T-T-L-E. This part, if I'm not mistaken, on the F is called a jot. So there's two more definitions. Jots and tittles. Most of the time, I think that the crossbar is actually called something else, maybe a crossbar. This little piece right here on the bottom of the F is, I believe, a jot, and I'll look that up later just to verify. So the jot is actually that little tiny tail that's on the end of each serif or part of a letter. So getting back to the I, do a couple of I's. You can bring it, sweep it a little bit more like this if you want to. But remember, I'm not doing a huge sweep. I'm just bringing the tail up a little bit more, and the reason for this is that this will connect to, when we start doing words, these little areas will connect from one letter to the next. And I'll get into that more later. Since I have space here on the page, I'm going to go ahead and do the J here. The descender on the J is almost as long as the ascender on the H. So again, for our purposes space-wise, I'm not worried right now about putting letters together into words, but I'm going to use this entire space. Starting about halfway through the X height, I'm going to go up a little ways, and then come down, and as I come down here, I'm going to start curving like this, again until my two lines touch. Then I'm going to cap this off and do a tittle on top. That almost sounds like a poem. A tittle on top. See if you guys can come up with a poem for that. I'm okay with all these overlapping letters because, again, this is just a practice sheet. As I've said on numerous occasions, this one lesson frustrates more people than I've ever experienced before, so I get your frustration. It is very difficult. Learning something new is always difficult, and this is something that a lot of you probably have never done before, I'm guessing. So this time I'm going to start with the tittle so that I can measure it properly and come down like this. This is also where style comes in. The letter J does not necessarily need to be that long. How it differs from the letter I, you can see the I goes this way, the J goes down and curves that way. So the J could technically be quite a bit shorter. If you wanted to do a J shape that was this short, technically that's still a J, but it's a little too close X height wise to the I. So take it down a little bit below so that it's definitely a J. One other thing you might start noticing is that your hand is getting fatigued. If your hand is getting fatigued, it's because you're gripping the pen too hard. It does take a fair amount of control, but you can actually draw lightly or write lightly with these double pens. You can't see it, but I'm actually just barely touching the paper. This is the other beauty of using a ballpoint pen as opposed to two pencils. If we were trying to do this with two double pencils, which is the way I was taught, we would have already had to untape and retape this writing implement dozens of times. So that's all the way through L. I'm going to flip the paper over. And the letter M, we'll start with the letter N, because the letter N looks again like the first part of the letter I. And the only difference between the letter N and the letter M, obviously, is that the letter M has 3 of these instead of 2. Try and focus as you're doing this and try to control your pen so that you're stopping down here. It looks a little bit different than the example sheet that I've shown you, because the example sheet goes a little bit more. They go more like that, but this is really hard to control. It's a lot easier if you just start here or stop here and cap it off there. And also when you look at this M, it's starting to get a little confusing because they're going to run, these pieces are going to run into each other. When we do the logo design class in multimedia design, sometimes we purposely do things like that because we get interesting shapes in here. And you can see the interesting shapes that happen in here in the negative space. Everything around the letter is called negative space. We've talked about this before, but I'll put it down here anyway. Please write that on your notes so that again I know that you were watching and paying attention to this. Practice a couple of M's, practice a couple of N's. They're so identical that doing one really starts to make it look like you can do both of them really easily. Notice how I got a little lazy there, and look how fat it is right here, this section here. I didn't bother. I was focused on how much ink is coming off of my pen right here and starting to gunk up the paper. Be careful not to smudge these. I'm not concerned that it actually smudges your paper like that, as much as I am that you're going to end up with ink on your hand. The letter O we've already done multiple times, so I'll just do one. The letter P starts off looking like the letter J. So I'm going to start just below the X height, go up to the X height, come all the way down here, stop there, cap it off. And then this part of the P is just like that part of the O. Watch what I do here though. I'm going to stop right there. And then to get the shape exactly right, I'm going to go back over here and bring it up like this. And you can see that my pen started angling differently again. So let me do that again. Just remember that it's 3 lines. You're not just going to go all the way around. I've explained this before, but the reason that you have to learn it this way with those 3 lines is that an actual calligraphy nib has ink underneath the nib point. And if you try to do it all in one stroke until you get experienced with that particular tool, it can cause a lot of problems like ink coming out all over your paper. So there's the P. The Q is the opposite. So the Q starts off with the C shape. Starting off with the C, instead of going all the way around, I'm going to stop right there just like I did on the letter D. And then I'm going to come all the way up here. Notice I'm about halfway between these 2 lines, maybe a little bit more than half. I'm going to come down until I touch that line, and then come straight down, and right before I get to this next line, I'm going to go slightly to the left like we did on the L, and then come to the right. And also on the F we did that. Oops, we forgot the L. Okay, let's do the L. The L is going to be really tall. It's going to be the entire cap height in this case. But the L simply is straight down. When you get to the bottom, you're just going to curve like that. I guess I forgot it because we've done so many other shapes that are like it, like the N's and the M's. So again, the Q does have a slight curve on the top here, just like the G. You can actually do this in one stroke. The sheet will show you, and most calligraphy things will show you, to do it in multiples. But I've done it in one stroke here, so I'll go back to the 3 strokes. First part of the C, second part of the C, straight down from here. Right before I get to that line, I go left, and then right, and then finish it off with that little shape there. And this little shape can vary from letter to letter. That becomes more of a style thing. The letter R starts off like the letter N, or the letter I. You can start to sense the repetition here. If I put a tittle on that, it would be an I. If I put another one of these, it would be an N. This one goes starting right about here where the N does. When I get up to the top of the X height, I'm going to curve down slightly and stop. And then I'm going to cap it off. So again, there's a lot of control that's required here. If you notice on the handout, the R isn't that straight. It's actually more curved. It's almost a style preference. I prefer for our purposes to do it a little more straight, simply because you can get really carried away with some of those strokes, and that's probably the number one thing that shows the difference between really good calligraphers and just so-so or amateur calligraphers. A lot of amateur calligraphers will see this or this, and instead of doing a mostly straight line, they'll do something like this. And I'm going to do this wrong on purpose so that you can see what I'm doing. They'll do that part very curved, and they'll do this part very curved too. Again, it comes to a style choice, but I'd like you to do it like this one. So, focus on keeping that straight. We're trying to control our pens. And it just looks a lot neater. Okay, the letter S, since I have space here, the S is probably one of the more difficult letters to do, because you're going to start just below the X height. You're going to come into it like this, and then go like that. Notice how it doesn't completely stop where they touch. That's partly due to the fact that I'm squashing the letters top to bottom to make them fit into the X height. If this were the actual measurement of the 4 pen nibs, this would be a lot easier to do. But just practice on this one. So again, I'm starting here, and I'm going to go a little bit wider this time till it comes down like that. Then I'm going to come down here on the bottom and connect those lines. Cap it off there, start here again, and connect those lines. The S is probably like the G. It's one of the more difficult things to control and do correctly, so practice this one a bunch. One of the main things I want to see is I want to see the control. It is going to take you a fair amount of time to get this correct, but control is one of the biggest keys here, so please try to stay as close to the cap height as possible, or excuse me, the X height as possible. If you'll notice, all of mine go below it, because the width of this pen makes it very difficult to get a good S shape in here. But I'd like you to, as much as possible, not take up a whole lot more space than I've done here in this example. The T is just like every other letter we've started, except for the fact that it starts more like the top of the H. So if I just shorten this, that could be a T. In fact, since I have space here, I'll do one right here. So I'm going to start right here with my right pen, like this, curve it like that, cap it off, and then right where I capped it off here, I'm going to take this down like this and then just go straight across again until it touches like it did on the F. The T, if you'll notice on the handout, starts a little bit above the cap height line. Excuse me, the X height line. So actually, you should start it a bit above like this, and then bring this down like this. And again, notice how I'm just overlapping. Overlapping's completely okay. Just a practice sheet. I'm going to put another one here in between these two cues because I have space. I'm going to start here, and when I cap this off, I'm just going to bring it down at an angle, straight across until it touches there, and then cap it off there. Feel free to fill up as much empty space on your page as possible as you practice these. So any empty space in here that you feel like practicing another letter, go ahead and put one in there. I do want you to try and control it to the point where it's not turning into a huge mess, but it's okay to put other letters in all of these empty spaces. After the T we have the U. It looks a whole lot like an N. So I'm going to start off here just below the X height. I'm going to curve it up, and this time I'm going to sweep it over just a little bit more like this until they touch. This is where it differs from the N. If you notice the N here, we stopped there. On the U, we just went a little bit farther, so that I can start here again, come down here, and then curve it and stop it there like that. So these two strokes are similar. This one doesn't have the front end tail on it. It also doesn't sweep like that part, so let's do that one again. Right until they touch. Notice where I'm starting and stopping. My right of the two pens, my right hand pen is touching on the top of that X height line. And that's the style of U that I would like to see on your page. Remember to cap off as many of your things as possible so that it looks like a complete letter. The difference between the U and the V is that the V goes diagonally. And I'm going to stop right here instead of capping this off, because I'm going to go back up here, and when I do this part of it, it's going to cap it off like that. Someone yesterday suggested that I get a baseball cap that says cap it off. So I might have to trademark that. So again, another V. And I showed you this yesterday, or the last time. I'm going to skip a letter. I'm going to skip the W and go right into the Y, because the Y looks like a V, but you just continue down like this and then go straight across. The Y that I'm used to doing in the style of calligraphy that I normally do looks like this. Looks more like a U. And again, this is a style choice that you will make as you start doing calligraphy. This one's just as fine as that one, but practice this one for now. So the W is just like two V's put together. I don't know why it wasn't called a double V. But there is a slight variation, and I'll show you what that is. If you notice on the V, it curves here, whereas on the W, it's two parallel lines. This one's parallel with that one. So on this alphabet, the W looks like this. Diagonal. From here I'm going to come diagonally this way. Then I'm going to do another diagonal line this way. And then I'm going to do that V shape again, the second half of the V. If you prefer, practice this one a couple of times. But if you prefer, it is also acceptable to change it up just a little bit. Notice how I changed that. I did the V shape first, and then I added this shape here. Another variation on that would be something like this, which looks very similar. I just formed the letters slightly differently. The X, almost done, is a more swooping, angled letter. And here again is where the X height verbiage comes from. Cap that off. And this one again is going to go, one line should cover up the other one. That's how you know you've done the letter right. This one's kind of tricky also because there's a serif here and another small serif here. So the X is kind of a tricky letter. There were 1, 2, 3, 4 different marks on that. I'll do it again. So we're starting here, going across, capping that off, starting right about here, going diagonal in the opposite direction so the two lines cover each other up, doing the serif here, which I'm actually going to go a little bit lower this time, and then finishing it up like that. I'll do one more of those because that's a really tricky letter. We've already done the Y. The Z is very much like the X. I'll just do a Y here just for the sake of having one here. Again, it looks like the V. And then the Z looks like this. There's a little more curve on their Z, but again, I'd like you to try and do it straight because it shows a little more control. Notice the curve here at the top, and also a little bit of curve at the bottom, and then they swoop up here at the end. For our alphabet, though, I would like you to do this like this. Go straight across, come down so that the two lines cover each other, and then come straight across like this. If you want to add what's called a flourish, which is that little piece at the end, just cap it off and then bring it down a little bit. This is called a flourish, and we'll deal with flourishes later. But practice that Z a couple of times. And if you want to add the flourishes, you can add the flourishes. That's the entire alphabet. We'll deal with numbers and the capital letters at another time.